Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Prosek. Nice to be here. Everyone's bio is on the app, so we're going to jump right in because we only have 30 minutes for this very important panel. We're going to cover make it or break it capitalism, but we're also going to cover a lot about how AI and technology are changing the investment world. And to that end, I'm going to start with Bob Prince, CIO of Bridgewater. As you probably know, Bridgewater has been using the combination of technology and humans for about 50 years in the systematic investing model it has. So Bob and his firm, Bridgewater, probably know more about combining technology and humans in the investment process than anyone else in the world. So I want to start with you, Bob. Okay. What have you learned over the years, and how have you seen AI transforming your business model and those around you?
Yeah, thank you. You're right. Yeah, we have what we refer to as a fundamental systematic investment process. And the fundamental part has always been generated by the human mind, through the imagination, how do you think the world works? And the systematic part has always been the computer and technology and how we take what we believe to be true and process it on a day-to-day basis and take advantage of the perfect memory and objectivity of the technology. And it's been very, very important to us to keep those two things separate in that way, kind of the human-machine model, because the risk of data mining and optimization is so high. If the discovery process of how the world works is generated by the computer, you're highly prone to just, data mining and optimizing history and actually finding nothing worthwhile going forward. And of course, investing is all about getting it right in the future, right?
Right.
So we've been really rigorous about a sharp line between those things. And this is the first time that we're willing to kind of cross that line a little bit because of the power of large language models. And it's important to recognize that when we talk about AI/ML, there are the two different fields. There are the large language models, the ChatGPT and so forth, and then there's time series models.
Okay.
And what we're generally familiar with in the news is the large language models. The time series models are not nearly so advanced as the large language models. They're both running correlations, but they're just different. And then when you think about how to apply either one of those to economic history, you realize that you don't have enough sample size to rely on that history, right? The reason large language models work is because you have a massive sample size of written material, and therefore the computer can run correlations of how does this letter follow that letter across all human history of everything that's ever been written in every language. Massive sample size, but the sample size of economic history is there's one economic history, and very few cycles in very few countries with a limited amount of data. And so the ability to actually use time series models to actually discern something that's true from historical data is extremely limited. That's no different than ever, right? What's different is the ability to combine the two. The potential to use the computer and large language models to read about how things work, read about how balance of payments and economies and inflation work from things that have been written, and then to translate the learning from the large language models to the application in time series. And so, for example, one of the things that we do is we say, look at everything that exists today and ask the computer, how is today analogous to different points in history? Oh, well, today is a lot like this period and this period and this period and this period. Well, what happened after that and why, right? So what we're building is something we call AYA. We give it a name, we have investment associates. We've always had investment associates. Now we're building an artificial investment associate.
Interesting.
where now
Very.
it's like you have this assistant here, which is your which can read everything that's ever been written about whatever you're interested in, and they can at least advise you, right? You're not going to hand over the keys to Aya, but it's a very helpful
So it's like
assistant.
a co-pilot. Like
And so as an example of, we have investment associates classes. Every year the new graduates come in and they go through a year's worth of training and they have tests at the end. So we gave the tests to the ChatGPT, and 3 years ago they scored at the bottom 20% of the class. They're now scoring in the top 20% of the class.
That is frightening.
So literally, take the test that we give our investment associates, and the computer is now coming out as
Chat associates is going to kick
There's
our
somewhere
butts.
between a B+ and an A- in terms of the grade.
That's amazing.
So we've come a long way, and so we're carefully crossing that line, but keeping certain principles intact.
Fascinating, Bob. Thank
Yeah.
you. Ray
Yes.
from Lazard. I was listening to you speak a week ago about 5 macro trends you're focusing on. Take us through those and why they're important to make it or break it capitalism. And of the 5, if we're talking about the future of capitalism and risks, which one are you most concerned about?
So the reference that you made is to 5 macro trends that we've identified that will impact capitalism in a fundamental way. One is generative AI, about which Bob has begun to speak. I'd love to
All
see
of
the
our
transition.
analysts will be now.
I'd love to
Yes.
see the transition when you promote them. How that promotion process
that?
goes.
When
How
you
you
promote
promote the AFs or the IFs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I know how you do the associates, but the other, I'd be intrigued to learn that. So
By
one-
the way, we have to talk about
They're
how
really
radical,
hard. I
how-
can say they're really hardworking.
it's really hard. You just tell them, you give them a pat in the back.
Yeah,
how
that's all
radical
it takes.
truth and transparency at Bridgewater will affect these AI guys, but we'll see about that
They
later.
will. So
Go ahead.
generative AI is one. And when we speak about generative AI, and Bob has referenced it, there are at least 4 governors to generative AI. One is just the general computing power. The other is the talent. The third is data.
Yeah.
And the fourth is physical infrastructure, which will have an impact on how we think about the second, which was energy transition. So generative AI, energy transition, deglobalization or reindustrialization of many of the economies that have, like the US economy, which in the 70s transitioned from a manufacturing-based economy to a service-based economy. So we need to figure out how, given the geopolitical dynamic, we reindustrialize those societies that have transitioned. We'll have to retransition. So it's deglobalization, and then it's aging. If I look at what's taking place in the global north and the global south, as the head of the World Bank described today, excuse me, you have different aging demographics. In North America, as an example, the largest growing demographic is 65 and older. If we look at the continent, the largest growing demographic is going to be between 18 and 34. What are the implications of aging? And then fourth is cybersecurity. And if I look at the dynamics of cybersecurity, in 2010 we had maybe 10 billion connected devices. Today we have 40 to 50 billion connected devices. And so how we manage cybersecurity and the impact of that, some rogue actor, not only in cybersecurity world, but also in the generative AI world, will have an impact on how we think about capitalism. So generative AI, energy transition, deglobalization, aging, and cybersecurity.
I wish we had time to unpack all of those, but I'm going to go to Hazem. Hazem, you're running Investcorp. Investcorp has many businesses, but one of the larger ones is private equity. You invest in family-owned businesses. It's a very human business. Partnerships, relationships, big part of it. How do you see technology and what we just heard transforming your model?
So thank you, Jen. So first, let me make an observation, which I think is relevant. Obviously, today the world is much. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. The world is much more polarized than any time in the past. We've been fortunate over 42 years that we've been investing throughout the world. US, Europe, India, Middle East, China, Japan, Southeast Asia. And here's one thing we learned, particularly private equity investing. Nothing brings people closer together, addresses misunderstandings, than investments.
Ah.
When you are local, we have just recently made an investment in a baby retailer in Indonesia. Many of them have never met Middle Easterns, okay, or capital from, in our case, Korea and Norway and what have you. Nothing brings people together, breaks the barriers of misunderstanding, and 9 out of 10 is misunderstanding, okay, than investing and being there physically in the region, that part of the world, and what have you. So I think the topic of at least the headline of this session is Humanizing Capital. To me, that is the biggest part that capital brings. I think probably, I can guess there's 30 nationalities sitting in this room alone. And we are all here, first and foremost, because of capital, either we need for our business or to give out from excess capital. And that brings people together. Forget about nations or politics, just people, and that's the fundamental important thing. That's something which we learned, and that's something which we take a lot of pride on. So I think, coming back to Investcorp, I hope that not only would we be a great investor from a metrics and KPI standpoint, but also will leave a legacy as an investor who was able to bridge certain very difficult gaps between groups of people. So to come back to your question on technology. So I started my career in the early 90s. And for any of you who are in banking in the early 90s, that's when you start using Excel. And it was a big thing.
Well,
At least when I was at First Boston, Excel was one hell of a big thing. You know, suddenly what I could do in 3 hours, I could do in half an hour. And we thought the world changed. Investment banking changed for good. With Excel, and you just press a button and it prints, you press a button and pre-calculates complicated macros. I remember very easily, I was a young analyst then, we were talking, God, you know, if this Excel thing really kind of gears up, we're going to be out of a job. It can't do all our, like, you know, mathematical stuff so quickly. But the reality is, Excel became a very important tool of what we do, but ultimately we are in the judgment business. And whether it's AI, whether it's data, it's a natural evolution that has been going on for the last few decades. It's not going to stop. It's okay for us to be a little bit fearful of it. Being fearful means you want to dig into it, you want to learn more about it, and then you incorporate it. But ultimately, I think, you know, some people say gut feel. I think if you open people's guts, it's probably disgusting and smells. I don't think there's much there for decision making. But it's really kind of, it's all the nuances, all the variable. A part of it is your character, your DNA, your firm's DNA, and your direction. And the other bit is like all the experiences in life. Some of it on Excel sheets, and Excel is very helpful for it. Other of it is not.
an AI optimist. Okay, we've got of course, you're at Morgan Stanley right now. You're a CIO of the solutions business, but before that, you were a college professor at Berkeley. We're excited to have one academic, quasi-academic at the panel. And you reminded me that you were the beneficiary of what many of you do in the investment management world, which was a nice reminder to the societal impact of what we all do. But gives us a sense, you're sitting in the middle of asset owners and asset allocators. What is your contribution to this discussion being in that center point? And certainly feel free to expound on your experience as an academic.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I should say, and I don't want to date myself, but I remember Lotus 1, 2, 3 actually before Excel. So, and I totally agree with the basic point. I mean, if I start with sort of thinking about, at Morgan Stanley, we have, a very significant asset management business, $1.5 trillion, but we also have a very large wealth management business, another $4.5 trillion, so $6 trillion in assets that we manage for all kinds of clients. And if I think about, and reinforcing some of the points that were already made, I think the discussion is basically on two dimensions. One is about efficiency, which is I think what a lot of people are concerned about. It's, if these are efficiency enhancing, productivity enhancing tools, do they actually mean that we're going to substitute or are we going to complement the human? But the other one is effectiveness. And I think that a lot of the applications, whether it's for asset owners or asset managers, front office, research, back office, start with the discussions about efficiency. So can we automate can we increase the productivity, much like you were saying on the Excel side. But really where the more interesting margin, I think, over time is on the effectiveness dimension. And so, we see that throughout the, investment world, right? Like, let me give you two examples. One is, there's a very large trend, I think, if you look over the scope of 30, 40 years for investors to move from one-size-fits-all approaches to highly tailored approaches. Every institution has a different context. Every individual has a different context. And one of the things that, if you think about, we can more efficiently reach those clients in the front office, but we can more effectively, using these tools, do mass efficient customization. We have a business called Parametric, for example, at Morgan Stanley, which essentially customizes portfolios for thousands of investors. That can leverage technology so that we can do that more effectively, so that our portfolio managers are focused, we can leverage their ideas at a very, very customized level. That's the opportunity, I think, and the complementarity between technology and implementation.
So you're all very optimistic. I mean, Elon Musk will tell you by 2028, the AIs will do what humans do. Do you agree with that? That could be a very scary world. And I think the FII actually released something today that really is a call to action about AI and how we really need to align in government, society, et cetera, to get this AI thing right. I mean, Bob, you're so far ahead at Bridgewater with what you're doing. I mean, you have AI analysts. I mean, this is crazy. We all want to hear more about that. But what do you think? Is Elon Musk right? And how frightened should we be? And what risk is there ahead?
It's probably exaggerated.
Elon Musk isn't exaggerated.
You're just going to have another version of the same kind of stresses that capitalism and technology create now, which is, if you think about make or break capitalism, capitalism is a fantastic and necessary tool for the advancement of people and productivity. And when you look at a place like Saudi Arabia, who is now, fostering that kind of environment, it's the capitalism environment and the free markets and the incentives that will create the innovation that carries it forward. And so capitalism is generating productivity, but it's also inevitably produces differences, right? It produces income, and it produces higher income, produces more income inequality. And technology does the same thing. Technology has a tendency toward a winner-take-all game. And so technology also produces that kind of divide. Now, at the same time, it creates tools that everybody can use. So it's beneficial, but it needs to be managed properly. And so every country needs to be thinking about the policies to capture the benefits but while also dealing with the stresses that occur from both capitalism and technology. That's very related. When you look at China, they're doing it one way, and maybe they're leaning too much in that direction, right? So do they throw the baby out with the bathwater? Right. And so each country has got their own. Northern Europe, everybody's got their own approach.
Yes.
But it raises incomes, but it produces income inequality and produces differences across people. And you're just managing those two stresses.
So you're agreeing that we really need to align in the next 5 years to get this right?
Yeah, it's a tool.
Yeah.
I totally agree. It's a tool. Use the tool for good. Get everything you can out of it. Deal with the unintended consequences in a smart way.
So tomorrow, on the risks to capitalism, I'm going to do a chat with someone who wrote a book that proposes an interesting theme, which is that the boomers own how much in wealth it will be transferred to the Zennials, the Zs and the Millennials. And the Zennials actually have a different perspective on capitalism. It's a more socialist perspective. How big a risk do you think that is to capitalism? Just the point of view and the perspective of the new generations, and how much is that part of the risk in your view? Anyone want to jump in, Ray?
Let's stipulate it. Maybe somewhat self-serving that the most effective governance structure that we know is capitalism. What generative AI can do and what technology can do is enable those who don't have resources to get the opportunities to participate in a capitalistic world. The challenge that we have now is that the delta is so large between those people who have access to the opportunities in capitalism relative to those who don't. And to the extent that we assume the responsibility, which we're doing today, and we can effectuate that by giving people who otherwise would not have the opportunity to participate, then we can make sure that we bridge that delta. For the generation that you described, it's not clear to me, given the number of people who are interested in coming into a world where they can benefit and participate in the world of capitalism, that the socialism mindset that is being described is one that prevails.
Maybe that's a Western
And even
phenomenon.
if I look at Western, right? If I look at the delta between the top 10% in certain geographies that make $500,000 and the low 10% that make $10,000, that 50 times delta, to the extent that those people are making $10,000 or less were given the opportunity to make $500,000, they would seize that. And as the great Margaret Thatcher would say, I'm okay with socialism for so long as you don't run out of somebody else's money.
Right. Rui, you were going to, I see you gesturing. Go ahead.
I would just reinforce the points that both Bob and Ray made. And the way I would put it is, and technology is a big part of this. If you think about it in economic terms, it's essentially, what are the returns to human capital, right? And they're becoming steeper and steeper and steeper, partly because of technology. And so the concerns, I think, with something like AI, the emergence of technologies, that'll make it even worse, right? And there is, there are different kinds of industries. Like, think about industries where the returns to human capital are relatively flat, right? And then there are other industries. Think about sports or, movie stars, where a few people get very, very large compensation, and then there's a very steep slope downward. And so the question, I think, for whether this is sustainable politically, economically, is basically whether the introduction of AI can be done in a way that flattens rather than steepens the returns to human capital. What do you need for that? Number one is you need lots of education and training globally. And the second thing is you need access, what Ray mentioned. And there's an opportunity for openness with AI, but there's also a lot of, angles to close it.
Hazem, go ahead.
So I was going to say, Jen, coming back to your initial comment about so much generational wealth transferring in the coming years, just to put some numbers on it. Over the next 50 years, about 38 trillion of assets are expected to transfer from the older generation to the younger generation.
Yeah.
Now, the younger generation have two very interesting features to them. A, they are much more averse to risk-taking. So you should expect to see a larger commitment to alternative investments, a larger capital markets, and away from bonds and real estate and what have you. Second of all, the younger generation, they are much more comfortable to use their capital for the causes they believe in. So funding for charities, whatever the cause could be. It could be far left, far right, whatever it is. I think a lot of the agendas we hear of, I think it's fair to say that that funding is likely to continue for another generation or so.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to ask each one of you what the greatest risk to capitalism is in your view. What breaks capitalism? I just want to congratulate Investcorp for their IPO today. I know that's a bit of a commercial, but I saw it in the news. Bob, what breaks capitalism?
Taking away the incentives, taking away the upside. That's what China's doing.
Okay. You said, what did you say about China? I don't want to be, yeah, okay. We heard it, right? Okay. Ray, greatest risk to capitalism, what will break capitalism?
The delta between the North and the South, as Ajay pointed out today, I think the larger that delta, the more desperate those who don't have access, the more desperate the behavior.
You mean inequality?
The inequality.
Okay. Our college professor on the panel.
I would say whether we successfully leverage all of the people in society.
Okay.
I would say becoming intellectually arrogant. And there's nothing worse as a manager of capital when you believe you're so smart, you're so good, you stop listening. And when we stop listening, that's when we make mistakes. And that will be the fundamental challenge any investment firm or any investor in capital will have.
So you were quick, so I've got another minute. One thing at this conference everyone should check out that you've seen. I call this check this out. Hazem. Anything here that people should check out?
Definitely the ice cream.
Oh, ice cream. Great idea. It's hot over there in the dome. Check this out.
I would say the Red Sea development is amazing.
The Red Sea development. I have not seen that yet. Yes, Ray.
There's a Jetson machine over there. I get a sense that we're going to all be using one of those here soon.
Okay, Bob.
I like Arab coffee.
You like what? Oh, Arab coffee.
Arab coffee, yeah.
Good one. All right. Well, thank you to my esteemed panelists. We're good.